Chapter 281, Loki vs. Banner. On the arena stage, the two contestants took their places. Dr. Bruce Banner opposite Loki, the Nine Realms' foremost sorcerer. The third match had officially begun. Unlike the previous two fights, the Asgardian crowd was uncharacteristically quiet. They didn't wave or shout for Loki. It was as if they had suddenly learned to behave themselves. When they did whisper, it was only about Banner, the Kamar-Taj sorcerer. They murmured that he looked frail, even a little pot-bellied, and might not be very strong. Banner noticed the whispers, but it wasn't the mutters about his belly that caught his attention. He'd let his imagination run to court intrigues. In myths, gods schemed for power all the time. If Asgard hosted two rival princes, they'd pull out all the stops to claim the throne. Those quiet, guarded looks around, Loki must mean this second prince was losing ground in that struggle. Otherwise, why would no one cheer? Banner assumed the people were avoiding offending the powerful eldest prince, Thor. He felt a pang of pity for Loki. If he'd failed in a political contest, the consequences would be grim. Banner adopted a formal pose, clasped his hands to his chest, and offered a sorceress salute. "Your Highness, I am Bruce Banner, a sorcerer of Kamar-Taj." His manners were impeccable, so proper that even someone as strict as Mordo couldn't fault him. But Loki, who had been standing with his hands behind his back, had been watching him with a proud, wary expression. Suddenly, that expression snapped into fury. "What kind of look is that?" Loki's eyes flared. He straightened, affronted, the way a great cat might bristle after being humiliated by a clumsy beast. Banner froze, panic tickling his mind. Oh no, he thought. Prince Loki must be under enormous pressure, stepping out here with everyone against him, and my pity must have insulted him. Banner rushed to apologize. "I'm sorry, Your Highness. I was just thinking. He broke off, sweat forming on his forehead, palms slick around his briefcase. What could he say to explain that look without making it worse? Should he admit he felt sorry for him? That would be an insult for sure. Loki watched the stammering Midgardian and felt his own cheek twitch with anger. He ground his teeth and announced, pointing at himself, "I, Loki, Prince of Asgard." He paused, met Odin's gaze in the stands, and continued, louder and prouder. "Son of Odin, god of mischief, I bear a glorious destiny." Loki stepped forward. "Your defeat ends here, foolish Midgardian." He curled a superior smile. "You should feel honored to stand against a noble god." The murmurs around the arena fell silent. Asgardians might not like Loki the way they liked Thor. His slender build and trickery set him apart in a warrior culture, but they were proud of Asgard itself and the idea of their gods. Loki's arrogant declaration hit that pride. The quiet turned to a roar. Cheers rose up from every corner. "Loki! Loki! Victory! Victory!" Tony Stark idly stroked his chin in the lounge, watching, eyebrows raised as he wondered when the big guy inside Banner would come out. Leon grinned and teased Odin. "Prince Loki seems very confident. My earlier accident didn't slow him down, did it?" Odin's gaze lingered on Banner. "It's fine," he said quietly. On the stage, Loki spread his arms and basked in the applause as if victory were already his. Banner scratched his cheek, squinting at the green-clad figure and feeling oddly like a concert-goer who had been dragged on stage. He also felt relieved. Loki no longer seemed offended by his earlier look. Excuse me." Banner raised his briefcase and spoke up, voice tentative. "I'm a beastmaster. I have a few magical creatures in here that help in combat. May I release them?" Before Loki could respond, Banner added, hurriedly, "If that's not allowed, I'll just leave the case off stage. I don't want to." Loki heard him clearly. A beastmaster? What beasts could this Midgardian possibly control? Loki's contempt was obvious. A sorcerer from a backward world, probably commanding lowly hounds at best. How dare he step up to him, the greatest sorcerer in the Nine Realms? "Do as you please," Loki said dismissively. "Any trick you use will be useless against me." He lowered his arms, clasped them behind his back, chin tilted. "Instead of making a spectacle, you might as well kneel and surrender. Isn't that what you want? Conquest? Enslavement? This challenge is nothing but a bid for Asgard's favor, so be done with it. Yield." Loki looked at Banner like a man who had already seen the outcome. A beastmaster, he was certain of his own victory. "Ah, so I can fight with the fantastic beasts? You agreed to that?" Banner asked, pleasantly surprised. Thank you so much. I promised those kids I'd bring them to fight the gods. They're going to be thrilled." Loki's brow creased. Banner's tone set his teeth on edge, as if the man were treating him like some exotic specimen. He opened his mouth to sneer, but Banner set a battered leather case on the ground and clicked it open. He half squatted, plunged a hand inside, and looked up. "Shall we start now?" Loki folded his hands behind his back and shook his head with the faintest smile. "Typical. Foolish mortals, knowing you cannot win, you still insist on making a spectacle of yourselves. I'm almost curious to see how badly you'll fail." Banner's mouth twitched. Loki's barbs were getting old. He'd always thought the Stark brothers were the only ones with mouths like that, but apparently Asgard had a master at the craft. He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned over the case and called into it. "Hey, everyone, come out. The battle's started." All eyes fell on the leather case. People waited, curious about what Banner's fantastic beasts would actually be. For a long beat, there was silence. Loki's posture didn't change, but the two daggers in his hidden hands slid into his palms. He glanced at the case. If your fantastic beast is just a high, piercing cry cut him off. The next instant, a huge gray head burst free from the case, an enormous hippogriff. The bird horse unfolded great wings, and a horse's haunches tumbled out behind it. The creature's head nudged Banner and lifted him onto its back. With a thunder of wings, the hippogriff launched into the air, whipping a gale across the arena. Loki was buffeted by the wind, his voice half lost. This is..." The rest of his sentence died as more creatures erupted from the case. A 7-meter thunderbird flashed out, entirely golden, 3 pairs of wings beating in staggered rhythm. It sliced through the sky like an arrow, and faint thunder answered wherever it passed. A red phoenix followed, spreading molten feathers as it climbed. A Norwegian ridgeback, an immense ridgeback dragon, staggered out, shook itself, then focused and roared. Sulfur and hot breath hit Loki full on, whipping his black hair back and singeing the ends. Loki stared up at the 10-meter lizard, then at the birds, and swallowed. "Ugh, I hate lightning," he muttered. Banner shouted from the sky, "Attack!" The Norwegian ridgeback opened its jaws and unleashed a blast of scorching flame. The thunderbird beat its wings and called the lightning down, tearing through the blaze toward Loki. Fire and thunder braided together, filling the arena with heat and sound. The crowd's shouting fell away into stunned silence. A door downstage slammed open, and Thor burst out, hair wild, calling, "Loki! Loki!" In Kamartaj's resting room, Wong gripped his wand. "Is it over?" he asked. Tony shook his head, watching data streamed from his HUD. "No. Based on Thor's readings, that much thunder and fire will at most give your opponent a fashionable haircut." He frowned. His past magical hits had affected Thor, because they were highly targeted and augmented by the 10 rings. He doubted Banner could finish Loki with fantastic beasts alone. In the stands, Leon glanced at Odin, who simply closed his eyes. Leon let out a laugh that was half disbelief, half amusement. The thunder and flames crashed and rolled for a few long seconds. Then a green-clad figure stepped out of the flashes. Loki, blazing at the tips of his hair, his face blackened, glaring up at Banner. Aside from the scorched hair and soot, he looked oddly intact. The Asgardians in the audience breathed as one. Banner, still astride the hippogriff, blinked. He'd expected Loki's defenses to be sturdy, but not impervious. "Looks like energy attacks aren't doing much. Let's try hitting him physically," he shouted. The leather case rustled again. More fantastic beasts poured out. Erumpents the size of wagons, thick-skinned grafhorns, and a Nundu whose breath was a walking plague. They roared, shook themselves, and fixed on Loki. "Attack!" Banner ordered, calling out beasts by name. The Norwegian ridgeback lashed its tail. The erumpent reared and aimed its horn. The grafhorn charged, its stomps like falling trees. The Nundu lunged and clamped down with a poisonous bite. Above, the thunderbird and phoenix dove, striking at Loki's eyes with beaks and talons. The assault became a chaotic, brutal blur. Loki was hurled by a dragon's tail, rammed in the chest by a horn, and then pummeled under the grafhorn's bulk. Heavy feet crashed down on his torso and face. Claws tore, teeth bit, poisonous saliva sprayed. None of the wounds were immediately fatal, but the onslaught was unrelenting. Loki's limbs spasmed as blows landed faster than he could react. His vision whirled. He'd never imagined this, beasts summoned and controlled so precisely. Was this really how a beastmaster fought? Loki's mind went white as he caught sight of the Asgardians in the stands, of Odin's closed eyes. Shame and panic rose in him. This was it. He had thought he might triumph, or at least not be humiliated before his kin. Now he feared the god realm would remember only this: Loki, crushed and trampled by beasts called forth by a mortal. Loki felt he could not be more miserable. For a moment, he even imagined there would be no place for him left in Asgard. The Asgardians in the stands had gone quiet again, but in his ears, their mockery felt like a relentless tide drilling into his skull. If he could do it over, he would kick Vandal and Hogun straight into the arena. Damn that Kamartaj sorcerer, still letting that abominable beast stomp on his face. Pinned under the Grafhorn's feet, Loki tried to find any opening to turn things around. Then Banner's suitcase stirred. A moment later, a Niffler popped out, clinging to the case rim, its nose twitching and eyes suddenly bright. It tumbled free, and behind it, a string of Cornish pixies poured out in a stream. The pixies were troublemakers, only about 20 centimeters tall, iron blue, and utterly mischievous. They scattered like schoolchildren after class, shrieking and swooping for pranks. Banner's calls to return to the case were useless. Fortunately, the arena's energy shield kept them in. But they immediately set their sights on Loki, who was already being swarmed. The Niffler darted to the Grafhorn's feet, then scrambled up onto Loki's shoulder and began pawing at the shiny things on him. Loki was dodging bites and tramplings when he felt a lightness at his head. His crown was gone. He turned and saw the furry black creature beside his cheek, somehow holding a crown far bigger than itself and gleefully stuffing it into its pouch. "What are you? Wait, put that down!" Loki snapped, hands darting to snatch the crown back. The Niffler was impossibly quick, dodging left and right. No matter how hard Loki tried, he couldn't retrieve it. Then the Cornish pixies arrived. They were experts at meddling. Some yanked at his hair, some tore at his robes, others pulled his mouth to one side. Loki was being mauled and robbed at the same time, and his temper burned up from his chest into his whole body. His face flushed a furious red. "Enough!" he roared, his voice a breaking hysteria. A divine force erupted from him. Green energy burst up from under the Grafhorn's hooves like an exploding missile, blasting away the Niffler, the pixies, the Grafhorn, the Norwegian Ridgeback, and every other magical creature gathered around. Whether a tons-heavy fire-breathing beast or a tiny prankster, all were flung back as if hit by a giant hammer, crashing to the ground. At the center of the blast stood Loki, hair and robes in disarray, eyes rimmed red. "I am a god," he bellowed. "You ignorant, abominable, lowly creatures, how dare you humiliate me?" He looked a wreck, but the injuries were only superficial. Bites and tramplings that couldn't truly harm an Asgardian. He had taken worse and come out unscathed. But whether he was hurt mattered less than the single thought filling his mind. He had to get that damned Kamartaj sorcerer off the hippogriff and stab him 100 times with his most convenient dagger. Loki had never harbored such hatred for one person. He scanned the sprawled creatures, then fixed his gaze on Banner. Rage nearly overflowed his eyes. "You will pay for this," he whispered, and then flung both arms wide. 2 daggers slid into his palms. As he stepped toward Banner's position, dozens of figures identical to him appeared across the arena, materializing without warning in different corners, as if each were a real, separate Loki. Banner, still mounted on the hippogriff, froze. He'd seen duplication spells before. Kamartaj's form of icon could create copies of the caster, but he'd never seen it used like this. He instinctively searched for a counter. On the ground, the Lokis had already encircled the magical creatures and began to strike without hesitation. Dozens of gleaming blades flashed. Banner's heart sank. It didn't matter if the heavier beast suffered a few stabs. The likes of the fire dragon or a rumptant had thick hides. But the Lokis were targeting the Niffler and the Cornish pixies too. Those little things would not survive sharp blades. "Get out of the way!" Banner cried, urging the grounded creatures to dodge. He ordered the hippogriff to descend and drew his wand to cast a spell. But as his wand rose, he saw the Lokis on the ground pass straight through the bodies of the magical creatures. A Norwegian Ridgeback lunged with claws, pixies beat their wings frantic, and every time a dagger met flesh, it simply slipped through. Some Lokis stabbed, turned, and stabbed again. The blade slid through the Niffler and it squealed and flailed, then touched its chest and found it perfectly intact, its half-stuffed crown still in its pouch. It took only a beat for the truth to register. All those Lokis were illusions. The magical creatures on the ground, shaken but unharmed, quickly realized the same thing. Chapter 284. A mere mortal is still struggling. The Thunderbird, having climbed back into the sky, swiveled and struck again, but its talons closed on nothing. Banner, wand in hand, watched the scene with a puzzled expression. Loki's use of shadow clones baffled him. He was wary of what the trickster might do next. "Everyone, scatter," Banner ordered, on instinct. Cautious, the magical creatures dispersed. The Phoenix and the Thunderbird looped back toward Banner. He leaned against the Hippogriff's back and scanned the arena below. Every Loki down there looked real, each appearing to be fighting the beasts, but each figure passed through the animals as if they were insubstantial. Illusions. How can they all be fake? Where's the real one? Banner muttered. Is this all part of Loki's plan? He raised his wand and drew on the memory of Professor Flitwick's lessons at Hogwarts. A flick of the wrist, a practiced motion. He cast a string of revealing charms. Expelliarmus, Hominem Revelio, Aparecium. Dozens of Lokis wavered under Banner's spells, flickered, then solidified again. His magic hadn't fully dispelled the illusions, but it had disturbed them. All of Loki's images had flickered. That meant the ones on the ground were phantasms. Banner's training in engineering steadied his mind. Loki clearly had the ability to disrupt others' senses to disguise himself. If the real Loki hadn't appeared when the fakes wavered, then he must have left the ground. Either he left the arena, or he's underground, or Loki's voice cut him off from the left with triumphant glee. That's right, he's in the sky, to your left. Banner turned. The Thunderbird circled nearby, its back looked empty. In an instant, Loki materialized, having climbed aboard and gone invisible while aloft. The great bird cawed, flapped, and twisted, trying to dislodge the extra weight. Loki sprang up like a Tarzan, dagger raised in both hands, eyes locked on Banner. As I said, you will pay the price. In a single incredible leap, he covered the few meters between Thunderbird and Hippogriff. His speed was beyond ordinary. Banner felt alarm flare through him. He tried to dodge, but Loki was already upon him. Expelliarmus. Banner's memory of Tony's Expelliarmus cannon against Thor made the spell automatic. The dagger in Loki's left hand flew free, but the other blade glittered as it sliced toward Banner's chest. "No, don't," Banner cried. "Don't do this. You'll let him out." There was pleading in his voice. He wanted to win by his own strength. The plea only delighted Loki, who had tasted humiliation moments before. The prince's smirk widened into a cruel grin. He drove the dagger into Banner's chest. Blood bloomed, warm and sudden. Loki half-crouched, savoring the moment. "Mortals are mortals," he sneered. He wrenched the blade free and licked the sight of blood from his lips. "It's over, Midgardian." With a grip on Banner's shoulder, Loki plunged the dagger in again. Another gush of blood. The sound to Loki sang like rain on leaves, vindication washing away his shame. He imagined the arena erupting in praise for him alone. "Cheer for me, people of Asgard. I am the victor." Banner's voice thinned, hands flailing weakly against Loki as if to push him away or to cling. The display of helplessness only widened Loki's smirk until the prince laughed aloud. "Go, quick, go!" Banner rasped with his last strength, a grasp at breaking Loki's glee. Loki's smile faltered for an instant, contempt curling his lips. "Heh, still struggling, still unwilling to surrender, foolish mortal." Thump, thump, thump. A heartbeat crashed through the air from Banner's chest. Not weak or fading, but enormous and relentless, a pulse like an elephant trampling ice. A beat later, the crowd's roar swelled as the surrounding audience realized what they thought they'd seen. "Loki! Loki!" they shouted. The heartbeat kept pounding, low and thunderous. The magical creatures, in the air and on the ground, froze as if obeying a command. The fire dragon and the Grafhorn exchanged a look and then charged for the leather suitcase, scrabbling to get inside. The Niffler, mid-gorge with a crown, abandoned its treasure and became a black blur, diving into the case. The giggling goblins shrieked and bolted back to their hiding places. The Nundu, the Erumpent, the Phoenix, even the Hippogriff beneath Banner and Loki, flipped and fled toward the same refuge. As it tumbled into the suitcase, the Hippogriff snapped its beak shut over the lock and sealed it. Within 3 seconds, the creatures had escaped. Their movements were swift and practiced. Loki, who had been thrown from the hippogriff's back, hit the ground bewildered, a smile still lingering on his face. Then, just before his knees met the earth, he caught sight of Banner's chest, gore dark on his shirt, but beneath the wound, green veins were racing out like ink through tissue. Wherever those green lines passed, the skin bulged and swelled as if something beneath was growing at a terrifying rate. Does this mortal have another trick? Loki frowned and rolled on the ground, bracing for the impact and trying to make sense of the sight. Chapter 285. The smile on Loki's face froze. Only Loki and Banner remained on the arena stage. Loki patted himself down and rose with theatrical grace, gripping 2 daggers. Across from him, Banner kicked up a cloud of dust as he struggled to his feet. The dust hung in the sunlight, and a hulking, shadowy figure slowly resolved itself. Loki spread his hands, then tightened his grip on the blades. I've truly had enough. As a sorcerer from Midgard, all your struggle is futile. He ground his teeth. If you don't want worse injuries, you'd best surrender now. Roar! Before he could finish, a roar, more terrifying than any Norwegian ridgeback, shattered the arena. The sound drowned the crowd's cheers. Through the dust, a tall green figure tore forward, stomping the ground and leaving shattered craters in its wake. It barreled into Loki like a speeding train. Loki flew like a meteor, slamming into the energy shield with a heavy thud, then bounced off and fell to the ground. For a moment, he was like Thor in their first battle. The crowd's cheers turned into stunned gasps. Where Loki had stood, the enormous green form pounded its chest and bellowed to the sky. Hulk! In Kamartaj's lounge, Tony clenched his fist at the sound. He's finally out! Nice job, Hulk! Mordo and Hamir exchanged looks. Looks like we won't need to go on stage, Mordo said. Old Wang shrugged. As long as we win, it doesn't matter whether we go on stage or not. Pietro, pacing and holding his head, was the most anxious. No, don't, he cried. I wanted to fight those gods. He half-jokingly prayed for Hulk to lose. The others laughed. Tony pointed toward the arena. Give it up. Look outside. Hulk's angry. He'll end this fast. Back on the arena, Loki lay staring at the green titan now towering opposite him. Shock crossed his face. How could this scrawny, middle-aged mortal have transformed into something so massive and ferocious? Then indignation and fury took over. Changing form didn't change the fact that this was a mortal from Midgard. How dare he be humiliated like this? Loki slammed his right hand on the ground and rose, dust coating him. I've had enough, he repeated in a low voice, clutching his dagger and pointing its tip at Hulk. This is my final warning, mortal. Not just anyone is qualified to insult me. I am a noble god. Hulk looked down at the disheveled god, frowned, and snorted. Loki snapped. He charged, daggers in hand, and with every step, dozens of illusory clones sprouted around him. The arena filled with hundreds of Lokis. Their shadows stretched out and coiled around Hulk's own, wrapping about it like ribbons. Under the blazing sun, a web of shadow closed in, Loki's shadow magic. If those shadows bound Hulk's shadow, they could imprison him and stop him from moving. Hulk felt the restraint and twisted his arms but couldn't budge. Humph! Struggle like a dying fish. Hundreds of Lokis taunted in unison, raising their daggers that glittered with a cold, bloodthirsty light. Hulk, immobilized, slowly turned his head. The Lokis advanced. He snorted, then suddenly his muscles bulged. Hulk! He roared, and his arms ripped free from the shadow magic. The Lokis watched, astonished, as Hulk clapped his massive hands together, generating a blast like a mountain-toppling gust. If Thor had stood against it, he might have been sent flying, but the Lokis didn't sway, because they were illusions. For a second, Hulk hesitated. Then all the Lokis vanished. Only the true Loki remained, dagger raised behind Hulk. Realizing his shadow magic had failed, Loki canceled it and moved in on the real target. It's over, Midgardian. Now you will pay for your presumption. He plunged the dagger into Hulk's waist. The blade was forged from Uru. Even Thor had been wounded by such a weapon. Loki smiled with triumph and prepared to pull the blade out and strike again. Suddenly, a huge green hand closed over the hilt and his own, and a shadow fell across him from above. Loki's smile froze. He slowly raised his head and saw a massive green face, nostrils flaring with angry breaths. He tried to speak, to bargain. If you're willing to surrender now, but his words died in his throat. Hulk came the next sound, as Hulk wrenched the dagger free, grinned, and picked Loki up like a toy. Then, as if playing whack-a-mole with Mjolnir, Hulk slammed him into the ground. The impact shattered the flat surface into jagged stones and left a human-shaped crater. Loki lay there stunned. Hulk didn't stop. He hauled Loki up, flung him into the air, and drove him down on the far side. Another blast, another crater. He picked Loki up and slammed him again. Up and down, each throw harder than the last, until the arena echoed with the thuds and the crowd roared in a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Chapter 10. Weak God Hulk slammed Loki into the ground again and again. Each impact gouged a deeper pit, one strike lighter, one much harder, until the dirt around Hulk was a ring of craters. The blows connected, one pit to another, and a circular trench formed around him, roughly the height of Loki himself. With one final thunderous slam, Hulk released his grip, glanced down at the motionless figure in the pit, snorted, and spat disdainfully. Such a weak god. Then he turned to the crowd, beat his chest a few times, and bellowed, "Hulk!" Below him, in the deepest pit, Loki lay with one hand on his chest and the other slack above his head, his eyes empty and utterly drained of life. There was no fire in them, only a terrible, peaceful vacancy, as if he had already died. If a black-robed priest had walked up, made the sign of the cross over him and intoned, "Amen, rest in peace," it would have seemed oddly fitting. If anyone were to shout, "By Odin, may Loki enter Valhalla," it might even feel more appropriate. Silence fell. Everyone watched, stunned by Hulk's raw brutality. The first to break that silence were the visitors from Earth, especially the trio of mages. They'd seen Hulk smash people before in the Hogwarts world, and Tony was the quickest to react. The showy billionaire, sunglasses and a yellow-brown mage's robe, clapped loudly, pushed the door open, and shouted, "Hulk, well done!" He raised his arms and applauded exuberantly. Mordo and Wang followed suit, clapping in unison. Their scattered applause stood out in the gladiatorial arena's hush, so conspicuous it felt like they were gloating at the hosts. Pepper, embarrassed, tugged Tony's sleeve and whispered that they should be more discreet. She didn't know that if he flipped into double star mode, the Asgardian commoners would be a humorless punching line. Tony only shook his head. He'd been waiting for a moment like this, ever since he learned Asgard claimed to rule the 9 realms. In his mind, Earthlings could stand tall too. Before he could say more, scattered clapping began in the stands, then swelled into a chorus. Asgardians rose one after another, cheering and pounding the benches. "Hulk! Hulk! Hulk!" The warlike crowd had been won over by Hulk's fighting style. Its raw, brutal simplicity resonated with them. And Loki, the weak prince? His defeat seemed only natural when measured against that green, muscle-bound force. Even Thunder God Thor, grinning and pounding his own chest, joined the shouting. Tony's momentary vexation at Hulk stealing the spotlight softened into amusement as Hulk smiled broadly on the arena, raising his arms and proudly shouting his name. The cheers washed over him like the rowdiest of home crowds. For a moment, it felt like being back in a raucous school arena. On the podium, Leon looked to Odin. "May the results be announced, Your Majesty?" Odin, eyes closed until then, opened them slowly, cast a resigned glance toward Loki in the pit, and nodded. "Is this banner below truly a mage?" he asked casually. "He resembles our Asgardian warriors." Leon shook his head. "He's no warrior. He's only using the characteristic magics of Kamar-Taj." Odin gave a wry look, as if the magical hallmark of the mages really was turning big and smashing things. He tapped the ground with Gungnir. A ripple of divine power carried his voice through the arena. "The third match, Kamar-Taj wins." He paused, then looked toward Leon. "Lord Leon, you have taken 3 of 5 battles. Do you wish to continue?" There was a human gentleness in his gaze, despite the formal announcement. Leon considered the alliance between the realms. Even without sentiment, there was no need to press things too far. "Yes, let's continue. I want to see the full display. The Warriors 3 still haven't truly shown themselves." Odin smiled and tapped his spear again. "The 4th battle will begin in 30 minutes. The contenders gradually filed out. Hulk shifted back into Bruce Banner, hurriedly pulling up his pants and collecting his briefcase as he headed for the lounge. Thor had Loki carried back, seemingly more annoyed than triumphant. The arena quieted into the murmur of people preparing for the next bout. When the 4th match began, Asgard sent out Vandal, one of the famed Warriors Three, and proclaimed first swordsman of the Nine Realms. But after his side's earlier defeats, Vandal walked in hunched and somber, head bowed, his confidence shaken. Kamartaj's substitutes exchanged glances without prompting. Tony, Wang, Mordo, and Banner held Pietro back on the bench. Tony and the others were wary of rushing him in. The one who stepped forward was Wang. He straightened his robes and strode onto the stage with a proud chest. Unlike the previous matches, Wang's magic was flamboyant and relentless. Rings of Ragador, Vishanti's holy sword, the winds of Watumb, attack, block, counter. Vandal's swordsmanship proved overwhelmingly strong, forcing Wang into a dizzying defense. Then, with a calm sweep, Wang wove the mystic art of portals. Portal after portal opened, Vandal's blade was redirected back upon himself, and the crowd gasped as their champion's momentum turned against him. After 20 grueling minutes, the match ended in a draw. Wang returned to the lounge flushed and proud. It wasn't a full victory, but to hold the first swordsman to a draw felt like a win. The fifth match came half an hour later. Grandmaster Hamir stepped up for Kamartaj and fought fiercely, but after a dozen minutes he narrowly lost to Volstagg, the roaring lion of the Heavenly Palace. With that, the challenge concluded. 3 wins, 1 draw, 1 loss. Kamartaj took the match series. Asgard salvaged a measure of pride with the single victory, but the contest's close and dramatic finish had already ignited the arena. People lingered despite preparations for the evening banquet. Thor, hardly finished, leaped back onto the stage and beckoned Tony. Tony, who still had tricks up his sleeve, couldn't resist. Despite Pepper's protests, he strode back into the ring. Their duel stretched on long into the evening. Beams of light and bolts of lightning crossed and braided overhead. Clashing metal and arcane impacts rang from sky to ground. Thor learned to read Tony's moves and adapted, while Tony's usual disarming gambits lost much of their edge. The two fought in a relentless, intricate dance, neither yielding easily. By the time the last echoes faded, night had fallen. Chapter 287, Dinner Night fell, and the Asgardian divine realm glittered with lanterns. The heavenly palace at the heart of the realm was ablaze with light as usual, its blade-like architecture and every inch of its walls radiating a proud history. But tonight, the palace buzzed more than usual. To entertain the visitors from Kamartaj, Odin had set his great hall as the venue for a feast. Handmaidens in brocaded robes and whalebone skirts welcomed Leon and his group into the hall. The 2 princes and the Divine Realm warriors were arranged along both sides. A long table ran from the entrance up to beneath Odin's throne, piled high with delicacies. Odin opened the evening with a short speech from his throne, invited Leon to sit beside him, and the banquet began. It was gloriously loud. The Asgardian warriors were so enthusiastic they practically shoved roasted lamb legs into everyone's hands. Pepper and Shirley felt awkward at first. Leon had said the trip was just a fight and a meal before heading home, so most of the party had stayed in casual clothes. Only Tony and a few others wore robes. Against the magnificently dressed Asgardians, with their dazzling jewelry and elaborate outfits, Leon's group did look like they'd crashed a family celebration to eat for free. Luckily, Asgardian banquets weren't like the stiff, self-important affairs Tony was used to on Earth. No suited businessmen putting on airs, just warriors who could drink. After all, could you call someone a warrior who couldn't hold his liquor? The Vikings would be the first to disagree. As soon as the feast started, Thor squeezed in beside Tony and Banner and began, "Ha ha ha! Stark? Banner? Drink? This is the finest wine in the palace. Drink. Come on, drink again. Stark, you must have the constitution for this. Drink. Drink, drink, drink." Thor clinked tankards with Tony and Banner in turn. One for Tony, one for himself, one for Banner, one for himself. Every glass he downed, he smashed on the floor with a laugh. After a few rounds, the floor was littered with broken glass. Today, Tony really learned what it meant to drink like a champion. Asgard wine was potent, malty and rich, with a faint undercurrent of strange energy. It felt like a high-grade nutrient solution with alcohol, warming and intensely nourishing. Maybe it wasn't quite right for an Earthling's metabolism. After a few cups, Pepper began staring at Tony with eyes so glossy they looked like they might overflow. Tony felt a queasy, uncomfortable sensation and muttered, "I can't anymore. I'm going to the restroom," and slipped out of the hall, leaving Thor to badger Banner instead. On his way out, he passed Shirley and Yelena, who were eating non-stop. The Divine Realm's food was a feast for them. Pietro was flirting with the warriors, while Mordo and Wong sat quietly drinking. Before he left, Tony glanced back. Natasha had become the center of attention among the Asgardian women, with Wanda at her side. The Asgardian girls were dazzled by Wanda's powers, and Natasha used the attention to gather information. "This is lively enough," Tony said to himself, wiping wine from the corner of his mouth as he stepped outside the great hall. Outside, the noise continued, groups of Asgardians drinking and talking. Tony found an empty spot, leaned on the stone railing, and looked out over the lights. The cool air sobered him a little. He hadn't really needed the restroom. He just knew he couldn't handle another drink. If he kept going, he didn't know what Pepper would put him through back in the room. Thinking about it made him a little melancholy. Years ago, with such an opportunity, beautiful women, wine, the whole night, he might have wandered off to enjoy the company. Now he could only hope Pepper would be a little gentle tonight. "Sigh, what wonderful girls," he murmured, staring at the distant brilliance. Asgard at night wasn't so different from New York. People carried themselves with confidence and happiness. After all, they were the people of a kingdom that ruled the 9 realms. Why run out into the cold, Stark? Don't tell me you're hunting tonight's target. Be careful. If Pepper finds out, she'll make sure you can't get out of bed tomorrow. A teasing voice sounded at his shoulder. Tony didn't have to turn to know it was Leon. "I can't get out of bed?" Tony shot back. "You better change the subject, or I'll think you're just projecting." Leon leaned against the railing beside him. "Is that so? Pepper does look pleased tonight. Want me to deliver a challenge for you?" Tony covered his discomfort with a few coughs. "What kind of challenge? Don't try to stir trouble between me and Pepper." "Wait, why are you out here? You're not the one looking for a target, are you?" Tony eyed him suspiciously. "Which Divine Realm girl is it? Don't tell me it's Sif," Leon smirked. "I'm looking for a target, all right, but not a person. Old Odin is too stiff in formal settings. Talking with him gets boring." He added, "I asked him to show me the treasury first, to see the spoils. They're impressive. He's already had people pack them up." "The casket of ancient winters and the eternal flame?" Tony asked. "And the eye of Agamotto," Leon said. Tony frowned as he watched the hall's lights. Old Cap, the one from the future, said the eternal flame is what leads to Asgard's destruction and that it's the key to stopping Hela. "Is it safe to just take it away?" "Of course it's safe," Leon replied easily. "I'll only use it for 5 years. Once I understand the laws it contains, I'll return it. It'll be back before Ragnarok. No time wasted." "I thought you planned to intervene and save them," Tony said. "We'll see." Leon's tone was cool. "This is their family matter. What right do we have to interfere?" Tony considered that. Ragnarok was a war started by Odin's children, Thor and Hela. If siblings tore their home apart, it was, in a sense, their own thing. Still, Tony felt the weight of what he knew. "I'm just a little emotional," he said, glancing toward the laughing Great Hall. "In 9 years, the homeland of these people will be destroyed. Even the survivors will be hunted by Thanos. Half of them wiped out. One prince will lose an eye and grow decadent. The other will escape Ragnarok only to be killed by Thanos. Compared to the laughter tonight, that future feels unbearably cruel." He looked at Leon with burning eyes, the lights reflecting off his determination. "Leon, we have to protect Earth." "Cut it out!" Leon barked, but didn't look at Tony. He glanced at him and then at Tony's expression. "Getting all sentimental all of a sudden. What are you trying to do?" Leon understood Tony. Tony could be sentimental and melancholy, privately. He'd brood and mourn in secret, never showing it to anyone, not even Pepper. Even if Tony had grand plans to save the entire world, he'd still arch an eyebrow and joke. "What, you want me to save the world? That's the funniest thing I've heard today." The word sentimental snapped Tony upright. "Was I being sentimental? Leon, if you want tips on how to woo girls, just say so. Like Wanda, I think." He started babbling to cover his unease. "Stop," Leon cut him off, holding up a hand. "I know what you're trying to do. You're worried about Thanos, aren't you? You want to bring it up with me so you can feed the future intel to Odin, get him on board, and have us nip the threat in the bud together." "You said that," I didn't voice any plan. Tony raised both hands in mock surrender. Leon shot him a look that said, I see what you're up to. I thought you weren't worried anymore. Tony's voice softened. Don't worry. I can handle Thanos. 2 of the Infinity Stones are with me, Leon said. Last time, the Time Variance Authority even sent me a bunch of discarded gems. How do you think Thanos could still pull off his ambition? Leon pointed toward the starry sky. Remember that batch of Super Skrulls? After they arrived here, they've been searching the universe for the remaining stones for me. Maybe they alone will be enough to deal with Thanos. Besides, if Odin acts now, he'll fall into the Odin sleep, maybe even hasten his death. Teaming up with him would be useless. Hearing Leon, much of Tony's anxiety drained away and was replaced by relief. He already knew the facts Leon was stating, but hearing it from Leon made it feel decided, inevitable. The last time Tony had heard future intelligence and been reassured by Leon, he had relaxed for days. The worry always crept back in, but being with Leon let him breathe easier. All right. Superman Clark will sort everything out, Tony said, grinning, and gave Leon a hard, friendly pat. He thought a moment. So for now, we won't tell Asgard about the future intel. We'll wait for Ragnarok and decide whether to offer support then. Tony was wary of Asgard. They were nominal rulers of Earth and still technically aliens. So that's the plan? Leon raised an eyebrow and pointed toward a copse of trees. Too late. Odin's already been listening in over there. What? He was squatting in a tree? Tony craned his neck. Perched where light and shadow braided together, a black raven sat on a treetop. The bird cocked its head, met Tony's gaze, gave a small nod, and then flew off. A raven? Tony was stunned. The bits of Norse lore he'd memorized surfaced. Odin had 2 ravens, Hugin and Munin, his eyes that patrolled the 9 realms. God, we were having a secret conversation, and you let Odin eavesdrop? Tony flushed. I thought you knew, Leon replied as he stood and walked back toward the main hall. This is Odin's domain. He knows everything that happens in the hall. Of course I knew, but couldn't you have given me so much as a hint? Tony followed. As they re-entered the hall, they brushed past a green-clad figure with his head down. Leon paused, then turned his head to watch Loki slip away into the shadows. No one else noticed the second prince's departure. Loki moved alone, like some dismissed tiny poodle. Tony raised an eyebrow. What's wrong? Looking at pretty things again? Nothing. Leon's voice went quiet as he stared toward the throne where Odin sat, smiling at him. Looks like this banquet has a second act, he said softly. He hadn't expected Odin to act so quickly on a few hints about the future. Asgard could open wormholes with the Bifrost Bridge, spanning the 9 realms, but tucked away in the wilderness of Asgard were lesser-known, hidden passages linking to other worlds. Loki was using one of those passages to slip down to Jotunheim, the realm of the frost giants. He'd left arrangements there to shepherd some frost giants into Asgard. His original plan was petty and calculated, disrupt Thor's succession ceremony. Thor should have taken the throne months ago, but a challenge from Kamartaj delayed the coronation. Loki had plotted for a long time to prevent his brother's succession, to provoke a mistake that would result in Thor's punishment. Then he'd step up to show his value to his parents. But the arrival of the Kamartaj mages had ruined that timeline, especially the Beastmaster. Now, every time Loki closed his eyes, the shadow of the Hulk haunted him, the mocking chorus of voices deriding him as the unappreciated second prince, a schemer no one liked. He couldn't shake the humiliation. The ship touched down with a muted thud. Loki stepped onto Jotunheim's glittering glacier and walked to the cliff to peer down at the sleeping frost giants gathered below. His face was hidden in shadow. He'd planned the banquet disruption, make those Midgardians pay, and see his brother humiliated. No one shall defile Asgard's honor, he murmured. Back in the Great Hall, Leon and Odin stood side by side before the throne. Below them, the banquet swelled, but both men were staring toward the palace's farthest edge. They looked past columns and courtyards to the distant mountains where a band of figures emerged from a cave, Loki at their head. He guided the frost giants with practiced ease toward the hall. They'd arrived by craft, and as fate would have it, they passed an Asgardian escort carrying 3 gift caskets, spoils from Kamartaj. Among them was the frost giant's greatest treasure, the casket of ancient winters. What would you have me say, Sir Leon? Ragnarok is coming. There's nothing more to be said about the future. Odin's face was grave. You're still going to let Loki make a play? Leon asked. He suspected it was possible Odin intended to act, but then withdraw into the Odin sleep. People knew how that looked, an old fox making appearances but not staying to fight. You're not planning to just nap and call it a day, are you? Heh, rest easy. I will act. Odin smiled. Leon remained skeptical. How could Odin act if acting meant falling into the sleep? But then as he watched, his eyes widened. Loki's party had landed near the palace, and the Asgardian detachment bearing the caskets was passing right in front of them. The three caskets, spoils of Kamartaj and vitally the casket of ancient winters, were right there. You cunning old god, Leon muttered, rolling up his sleeves. Chapter 289, Icebox. Before Leon could move, Odin gripped his arm. Please wait, Sir Leon. Loki may be mischievous, but he knows his limits. Loki knows his limits? Leon thought. That wasn't funny. He studied Odin's face. The All-Father was old, deep wrinkles carved into his skin, a constant tiredness about him. Yet under that wariness, his one remaining eye was still as keen as a blade. Leon knew that even if this aging ruler muttered that Ragnarok was inevitable, he would still find every possible way to leave a sliver of hope for his children and his people. Those warriors carrying the gift boxes who had taken the detour to the edge of Asgard, that had to have been arranged by Odin. No sensible transport route would normally pass that way. It wasn't as if moving an artifact required a ceremonial circuit around Asgard. Where might makes right, Asgard did not need absurd pageantry. The moment Loki brought the frost giants here, Odin had sent the chest of ancient winters forward. What was he planning? Leon looked again toward where Loki stood. The scene unfolded clearly. The transport team moved past Loki and his companions. Loki had halted the frost giants and ordered them to keep quiet. He intended to lead his people straight into the palace. But the convoy hadn't gone far when the bottom of one gift box, unable to bear the artifact's weight, suddenly broke. The casket, glowing with a cold light, thudded to the ground and rolled. It gave off a bone-chilling chill and pulsed with an eerie ice-blue glow. An ordinary onlooker might have thought it was just a square block of glowing ice, but dozens of frost giants had been hiding in the woods beside the road. The casket of ancient winters. The giants recognized it at once. It was treasure from Jotunheim. Their treasure. Greed overtook them. They lost all reason. One giant, Dida, stepped from the trees, eyes fixed on the casket. He was the first, but not the last. No frost giant could stay calm now. Loki's plan had been cunning, lure the frost giants to Asgard under the pretense of helping them reclaim the casket, then let them cause trouble in the palace to provoke Thor into attacking Jotunheim. But how had the casket come this close? And how had it conveniently rolled out of the transport? Loki crouched behind a tree, panic prickling under his skin. The casket in the hands of ordinary Asgardians was barely useful. In the frost giant's hands, it would be a catastrophe. Thousands of years ago, King Laufey had used that artifact to freeze an entire planet. The thought made Loki break into a cold sweat, as if ants crawled up his spine. The giants began to emerge from the forest, drawn by greed. Loki bit his tongue and dashed from the trees. "What are you doing?" he shouted at the transport team. "Why is the casket of ancient winters here? How did you let it fall?" He put on an act of outrage. "This is an item from the treasury. Why did you bring it out?" The transport guards recognized him. "Loki, His Majesty ordered us to send these artifacts to the palace. They're gifts for the mage stronghold, Kamartaj." "Gifts? To those mortals?" Loki's feigned indignation dropped away. "No, I won't allow it. Father has been deceived by those mortals. Such a crucial artifact cannot be given to Midgard." He crouched and reached for the casket. "These items are under my control now. I'll return them to the treasury." The guards hesitated. They, too, disliked the idea of sending such powerful relics to Kamartaj, but they stood by their orders. By then, the frost giants had already poured from the woods. "That's our treasure. Asgardian, stand aside." They hurled ice axes and frost-tipped arrows like a sudden rain. The guards were caught off guard. Who would expect blue-skinned giants to burst out of the trees beside Asgard's road? Armored and armed though they were, the guards stood no chance. Some were decapitated by axes, Others were frozen stiff with arrows through their chests. Loki watched helplessly as the 5 soldiers before him fell. His outstretched hand stalled midair, inches from the casket. Cold rushed up from behind, and he dared not turn. He forced a strained smile. "You were too impulsive," he lied to the giants. "I was tricking them. Once I have the casket, I can take you all back to Jotunheim." He tried to buy time, to keep blending in with the giants until he could seize the artifact. He turned his head slowly, attempting to persuade them. But before he could finish, a blue arm shot out and clamped around his neck. Ice raced along the limb, spreading across Loki's skin, freezing him with sickening cracks. He became an ice statue and collapsed. The frost giants barely spared the frozen Loki a glance. They surged toward the casket. Their leader hefted it high with both hands. Cold burst forth like a dam breaking. Where it swept over trees and stones, everything froze solid, the world turning to a faint blue-lit landscape. For a heartbeat, they were silent. Then they roared in triumph. "It's real. It's the real casket of ancient winters. We must take it back to Jotunheim. Back to the ship." Cradling the casket, they sprinted back along the path they had come, then were gone. Not long after they left, cracks spidered through the frozen shell encasing Loki. It shattered, and the ice crumbled away. Loki's eyelids snapped open. He was physically unharmed, but his skin from the neck down had turned an ice blue, and his eyes were blood red, frost giant features. He blinked, momentarily stunned, then his stomach lurched as the world began to spin. Chapter 290, Odin's New Parenting Plan. Below the divine throne in the heavenly palace, Leon watched the frost giants depart in the ship they'd arrived in and nudged Odin. "Loki knows his limits, huh? Didn't you say you'd make a move? Can you start now?" He pointed toward the sky where the giants had gone. "Hurry, your majesty. If you wait, the giants will be back in Jotunheim before you know it. At that rate, Laufey will come demanding the casket of ancient winters, and might even put out whatever's left of my eyes." Odin's cheek twitched at the bitter quip. This Sorcerer Supreme certainly had a blunt way of speaking for his years. "Lord Leon, what do you think of Thor and Loki?" Odin tried to steer the conversation away. "I think they're both fine. Whoever becomes the next God King can lead Asgard to greatness," Leon said. Odin paused, then sighed softly. "Thor has courage and strength, but not the sense of responsibility. He looks mature, but he's still an overgrown child." "And Loki," Odin searched for the words. Leon cut in with a dry nod. "So Thor's still a child, and Loki is someone else's child. Neither are suitable, right?" "No, Loki must still grow." Odin's throat tightened. "But he does need to grow." "So, aren't you going to go after those giants?" Leon pushed, ignoring the barbs about Thor and Loki. "Lord Leon, I want to say this is a good chance for Thor and Loki to gain experience," Odin said earnestly. Leon frowned. "You want my help?" "Yes. You said before, you'd act yourself. I will act, but if I cannot overpower Laufey, I hope Lord Leon will lend a hand." Odin, famed across the universe, needs help against a single Laufey? Leon couldn't hide his incredulity. "It's to prevent accidents. We are allies, aren't we, Lord Leon? Everything in Asgard can be shared with Kamartaj." Odin's offer was blunt and astonishing. He was willing to put Asgard's resources on the table to secure an alliance with Kamartaj. For the first time in years, Leon saw a softer pragmatism in the iron-willed God King. He considered it. Asgard would not last forever. Perhaps giving it away wasn't madness. "How do you propose we do it?" he asked. Both sides understood the unspoken bargain. The condition for alliance was everything in Asgard. Afterward, power would belong to the stronger. That had always been Odin's law. Strength determines right. He hadn't lost that in his old age. "Come, Lord Leon." Odin smiled and helped him up the steps to the platform by the throne. Then he turned to the crowd below. His expression hardened. Gungnir tapped the ground lightly, thud, thud, and the drunken hum of the banquet fell silent. Asgard felt that presence of supreme authority. "People of Asgard!" Odin's voice carried through the hall. "We face a war." He announced the facts plainly. "Unfortunate news. Frost giants from Jotunheim infiltrated Asgard and stole the casket of ancient winters, an offering we intended for our allies. They killed our warriors and gravely wounded Prince Loki. They now return to Jotunheim with the casket." Before he could finish, Thor smashed his cup and stormed to his feet. "Father, how is Loki?" he demanded. "He will live," Odin said. Thor's relief was brief. fury replaced it. Where are those frost giants? I will go after them now. They will pay. Thor's face, already flushed from drink, reddened further. They want war? We'll give them war. Let us invade Jotunheim as you once did and make them fear Asgard again. At Thor's outcry, the halls erupted. The Asgardians, drunk and fired by his zeal, roared in unison, "War! War! War!" Tony and Bruce Banner, slightly tipsy themselves, sobered instantly. They exchanged uneasy looks. If Asgard was eager to teach Jotunheim a lesson today, what might they do to Earth tomorrow? If not for the small, reassuring glance Leon gave from beside Odin, Tony would have been tempted to call Thor out from Earth's perspective. Odin held up a hand and rebuked him sharply. "Thor, we have a truce with Jotunheim. You are thinking like a warrior, not a prince or future king. Have you considered what war will bring? They killed our people and injured Loki. If we don't answer, I'm not fit to be Asgard's future king," Thor shouted. Odin's eyes revealed a flash of disappointment. Without a plan, he might have scolded Thor openly for his immaturity. Instead, he sighed and asked, "Are you willing to accept the responsibility for all the consequences?" "I am willing, Father. I will return victorious," Thor cried, leaping onto a chair in his excitement. Odin regarded him impassively, then waved his hand. "Very well. Go. Take whom you will. Catch those frost giants, reclaim the casket of ancient winters, and then do as you please." Thor whooped and raised Mjolnir. "Everyone with me! I swear by Mjolnir, I will lead you to victory." The warriors surged, fists clenched, surrounding Thor as they prepared to leave. They even invited Tony and Banner, treating the campaign like a boisterous outing rather than a war. Soon the great hall emptied, leaving only the Kamartaj contingent, Odin, and a few remaining women. Leon and Odin stood side by side, gazing after the departing warriors. "This is reckless," Leon said. "Are you sure they'll win?" "No matter win or lose, Thor will pay a price," Odin replied, lowering his eyes. "This is necessary for his growth." Leon was momentarily speechless. It was audacious, even ruthless, using Asgardian lives to force Thor's maturation. Typical of Odin, uncompromising. Tony approached, curiosity evident despite the situation. "You two are acting weird. Is there some secret plan?" "His Majesty Odin has a brilliant parenting plan. It has nothing to do with me," Leon said with a shrug. Odin inclined his head toward Tony. "Thank you for revealing the future, young man. Perhaps my past choices were wrong, which is why Thor and Loki must now face such outcomes." Tony's eyes widened as recognition dawned. This was why Odin had altered his course, because information about the future had forced his hand. No wonder old Captain America hadn't mentioned this skirmish when he talked of the future. Leon and Odin were still watching the horizon. "What are you two looking at?" Tony asked. "Watching Thor swing Mjolnir," Leon said. "Want to see?" He tapped his temple and cast a spell, an improved version of the Pensieve from the Harry Potter world, projecting the scene he had seen and sharing it with the Kamartaj contingent. The scene several kilometers away unfolded clearly in everyone's minds. Thor, at the head of dozens of warriors, was already in pursuit of the frost giants. The whole Asgardian army had mobilized, ready to support him at a moment's notice. Leon watched Thor's movements like everyone else as the thunder god swung Mjolnir and shot up into the sky. He plunged forward alone, leaving his men behind. "He's actually going to face the frost giants by himself? That's reckless?" Tony said, arms crossed. He leaned toward Leon. "No wonder old Captain America said Thor would be exiled to Earth someday. The guy must have caused a lot of trouble," Leon snorted. "Tony, you're the last person who gets to call someone else a messmaker." "What? Are you calling me a troublemaker too?" "Aren't you? I think most people would agree." Leon spread his hands. "Gentlemen," Odin interrupted the whispering. "If you don't mind, can we discuss the future? About Thor and Loki?" Tony and Leon exchanged looks. Leon signaled Tony to continue. The armored genius lowered his voice. "I don't know much about Asgardian politics, but it probably starts with Thor's exile. He hadn't told anyone the details before. He probably wouldn't either. If Pepper ever learned he was destined to snap his fingers and sacrifice himself to save the universe, Tony couldn't imagine the fallout. Far from the council chamber, Thor, still unaware that Odin had arranged matters, caught up with the frost giants. Their ship was already dropping toward the hidden spatial portal, but Thor dove down, calling lightning to spear the vessel. The ship crashed in a ball of fire. The casket of ancient winters erupted, spewing an instant blast of cold that began to freeze the mountain. More than a dozen frost giants pressed in, trying to overwhelm him. They had not mastered the casket's power. After a few exchanges, 3 of them lay dead. The leader realized their chance of escape was slim and shoved past his comrades toward the cave that concealed the portal. Clutching the casket in one hand, he shoved another tribesman aside with the other. "Go, return to Jotunheim. Tell the king, we've seized the casket of ancient winters. Hurry and bring aid." One frost giant broke away and disappeared through the portal back to Jotunheim. Thor didn't bother chasing him. He had made up his mind. Once he reclaimed the casket, he would march on Jotunheim and flatten it. He smashed away incoming ice blades with blow after blow of Mjolnir. Even though the casket's cold slowed his muscles, he trusted his strength. The frost giants used to frighten Asgardian children. They were formidable in legend, but not a match for Thor. It settled something in him. "Once Vandal and the others arrive, we'll go to Jotunheim together," he told himself. Thor planned to use the spatial portal the frost giants had opened, forgetting for the moment that the Bifrost Bridge existed. First, he would secure the casket. He turned to retrieve it, but stopped. On the frozen, desolate slope where he'd been fighting, 40 or 50 frost giants had appeared out of nowhere, standing behind a lone giant who cradled the casket. Around him lay more than a dozen corpses. The giant was stooping now, closing each fallen comrade's eyes in a slow, solemn ritual. Thor's mind went blank for a beat. The reinforcements had come through the portal, and they'd even taken time to gather their dead. "You are Laufey?" Thor asked without thinking. Something in him knocked like a hammer. He could sense the danger deepening. The frost giant did not deny the name. He kept closing the eyes, then slowly straightened. When he finally looked up, his gaze was like something unearthed from a mountain of graves, a ferocity honed by blood and bone. "Asgardian," he said, his voice a worn bell, "are you ready for death?" At that, a powerful wave of cold blasted from the casket. Under Laufey's control, the artifact unleashed itself fully. Wherever that cold touched, matter seized. Even molecules seemed to halt. Thor did not hesitate. He swung Mjolnir and shouted, "I am Thor Odinson, Frost Giants, pay for your invasion." Mjolnir rode him like a thunderbolt, cleaving through the thick ice and bearing him toward Laufey. Then, in an instant, Thor was encased, frozen solid, every muscle sealed in ice. Mjolnir itself clattered to the ground, frozen into the block beside him. "We killed him," some of the frost giants crowed and surged forward to finish the job. Laufey raised one hand and stopped them. "Stop," he commanded. "He is Odin's son. Our aim is to break Asgard's rule, not to shed blood like animals." Laufey knew Odin's strength. The older the Asgardian gods grew, the stronger they seemed to become. Old as he was, Odin was far from dead. If the thunder god Thor were killed, Laufey did not believe his forces could withstand Odin's wrath. He could not have beaten Odin in his prime, let alone now. But as long as the Prince of Asgard lived, the likelihood of Odin taking the field would be greatly reduced. Laufey swore that today he would make the Asgardians taste the slaughter Jotunheim had once endured. "Forward, welcome our warriors," he ordered. He carried the casket of ancient winters. Frost crawled from his boots and spread. Hills, forests, even the sea bowed under a layer of living ice. This was the casket's true power, enough to freeze a planet, to unleash storms that could destroy a world. Laufey rode the ice he forged beneath him. The frozen surface carried him, the frost giants behind him, and Thor, trapped and encased, toward the Bifrost control terminus. Wherever they crossed, millions of tons of seawater became solid at once, leaving a trail without cover. The Asgardian relief fleet spotted the procession from afar. The Prince of Asgard, frozen at the vanguard, the sight of him taken hostage, sent the warriors Three and Sif into a panic aboard their ship. They sent word to Odin demanding reinforcements and ordered their forces to harry the frost giants. The Asgardian ships closed fast. Laufey only needed to look at them. A ragged wall of cold rolled out and swallowed clusters of ships. They turned instantly to aerial ice floes and fell, lifeless, into the frozen sea. Wreckage and bodies, limbs sealed in ice, scattered like driftwood. In a single sweep, the fully armed Asgardian host was shattered. Thor, locked in his icy prison, could do nothing. watching his companions die, even as unbearable cold burned from his skin to his heart. He could only hope he didn't see the faces of Vandal or any of his closest among the shards. Laufey watched the gods torment and sneered. So this Thor is only a child pretending to be a lord, ignorant of true brutality. Odin's training of his son is pettier than his eldest daughter's. He flicked a hand and the ice under them sped up, propelling them toward the Bifrost terminal. With the casket of ancient winters, Laufey was unstoppable. Heimdall, guardian of the Bifrost, was frozen like everyone else. Laufey seized Heimdall's long sword, the key to the bridge. "Activate the Bifrost. Bring the army," he commanded. Jotunheim's invasion of Asgard began in full. Laufey led a host that spanned star systems. Frost beasts spearheaded the assault, ripping through Asgard's defenses. With the casket's power, the giant seemed irresistible. Asgardian lines fell back, and deaths mounted. Loki, who reached the front, could hardly believe what his plotting had unleashed. His small, selfish prank had opened the gates to invasion. Casualties rose without strategy or end. Father, only Father can fix this, Loki thought, and sped to the heavenly palace to tell Odin of the failing fronts. Behind the frost giant host, Thor's anguish burned hotter than Loki's fear. He cursed his rashness. If he hadn't slain those dozen or so frost giants, Laufey might have left after taking the casket. He hated his own weakness. If he were stronger, he'd have broken the ice and fought alongside his kin. Lightning gathered faintly in his veins, Mjolnir trembling somewhere in the frozen wreckage, but without Odin's guidance, Thor could not break free. The thunder god's inner storm sputtered impotently. As Asgard's losses mounted, Odin's voice finally cut through the chaos. "Enough, Laufey." A rainbow rent the frost-laden sky. Odin came, Gungnir in hand, riding an 8-legged steed from the halls of the heavenly palace to the coast in an instant. He loomed above heaven and earth, a presence that stilled every frost giant. Every eye turned to him. "Your condition doesn't look good, Allfather," Laufey observed, watering his contempt with calculation. His tone carried both derision and the urge to test the old god. Others saw only Odin's invincible majesty. Laufey saw the naked fatigue etched into his face. "Stop, Laufey," Odin said. "This was only a child's prank. Let no more blood be spilled." Everyone assumed Laufey was avenging the slaughter of the Ice World, everyone but Laufey and Odin, who knew whose hand had opened the gates. Loki's mischief had brought the giants in. Laufey, however, was not pacified. "What if I say no?" he answered. He raised the casket and let a torrent of azure energy, cold that could freeze stars, lash into the sky toward Odin. Odin snorted and raised Gungnir. "Then come." The shaft of Gungnir flared with a rainbow brilliance. A golden stream of power erupted and met the casket's frozen bolt. The clash shook the earth. The causeway linking the divine realm to the Bifrost terminal split and crumbled beneath the shock. Soldiers and giants on the bridge plunged into the sea, carried away by currents toward the void. This was the collision of two Skyfather-level forces. A single blow threatened to unmake the world. Then Odin, high above, began to pant. His right hand, white-knuckled around Gungnir, loosened. A thin, helpless sound escaped him, an old man straining to lift a weight too heavy. The spear slipped. The casket's riptide of cold struck him full. Odin turned into a block of ice. He fell from the sky and hit the sea with a cataclysmic splash. That impact struck the hearts of every Asgardian like a hammer. Where the All-Father had stood, a frozen ruin tumbled into the waves. Asgard, everyone felt it sinking under that single, terrible moment, was finished. Chapter 293, extinguished before it could ignite. "No, Father, don't, no!" Thor's roar was a frozen thing in his chest. He tried to deny what he had just seen, but Odin's majestic figure was gone from the sky. The aging All-Father had been defeated and had fallen into the sea. Only now did Thor understand clearly. His father was old. He was no longer the man who would always clean up his son's messes. "Father, he's been defeated." Loki collapsed to the ground in front of the Hall of the High Ones, utterly broken. Compared to Thor, Loki's torment was worse. He knew himself the catalyst for all this, and he burned with confusion about his identity, with fury at Odin for what he'd kept hidden, and with impotent rage at the frost giants. Inside the hall, Leon couldn't keep his composure either. "Odin, no. How is he as good an actor as the Ancient One?" he muttered. Had these ancient beings honed their performances over centuries? At the control terminal beside the Bifrost, Laufey still held the casket of ancient winters high. Cold poured from it, so potent it could freeze the world, and it kept gushing after Odin's fall. A river of ice and frost tore through the sky. Clouds and mist turned to crystalline shards and began to fall like ice rain over the divine realm. Tiny spicules stung Laufey's face as he stared in disbelief at the place where Odin had disappeared into the ocean. All-Father. No, Odin. Odin is defeated. He's defeated. Ha ha, he's defeated. The sternness in Laufey's face melted into a grin that widened until it seemed to split him. He laughed into the sleet. 1,000 years. Today we end it all. Asgard, Odin, this ends now. With no one left to fear, Laufey unleashed the casket's power without restraint. From its mouth poured a reverse river of cold, starting at his feet and running outward. The sea at Asgard's edge began to freeze, inch by inch. Warriors already plunged into the ocean were encased before they could struggle free, their life draining away in the merciless cold. Above and below, the world went to ice. The crystals turned everything a deep, wintry blue beneath the night. The entire realm seemed to sink into a second Jotunheim. The ice spread onto the land. Asgard's bravest fought on to the last man, but the cold brooked no defiance. Trapped in solidifying ice, Thor's eyes reddened. He had understood, when Odin fell, that he might be Asgard's last hope, but there was nothing he could do. He watched as his warriors were silenced one by one. Somewhere inside him, something snapped. Lightning flickered across his skin, and Mjolnir, imprisoned in another block of ice, began to shake. The sky, no longer blue but full of glittering shards, lit with a flash of electricity. Bolts crawled through the frozen vault above. The blue gloom turned bruised and then went black. Laufey looked up and smiled at the change, and then his gaze dropped to Thor, glass-like in his ice prison. "I almost forgot about you, foolish brute," he said. He strode closer. Fissures had already started to spiderweb through the ice around Thor. The prince seemed close to breaking free. "Because of Odin, I only bound you," Laufey said. "But now Odin goes to Valhalla. Why don't you go there first and make his welcome ready?" He leveled the casket and poured another surge of frost at Thor. Where the first cold had trapped him, this one finished the work. Thor, on the verge of a mighty breakthrough, was frozen utterly still, transformed into an ice statue at the exact peak of his fury and power. In the Hall of the High Ones, everyone watching through Leon's link went silent. "My Thor, no!" Queen Frigga sobbed, hand to her mouth as tears spilled down her face. Only the Camartage party and Frigga remained in the hall. When Odin had first fallen, Wanda and Pietro had nearly leapt from their seats to intervene, young, hot-blooded, certain of justice. It had been Leon's quick hands that held them back, explaining that Odin had staged this as a test for his sons. The cleanup, he warned, would be brutal. Odin had taken the brunt of the attack from the casket and might already be frozen or slipping into the Odin sleep. "Leon, Sir Leon, please, can you do something?" "I'm afraid Thor will," Frigga pleaded, grief and dread written all over her face. As a Vanaheim goddess, she knew the price of Odin's ruthlessness. He had once sacrificed the Valkyries to defeat Hela. Now he had thrown away countless warriors again to force his son's growth. In the original timeline, he had been willing to sacrifice Earth, letting Loki wield the Destroyer against Thor. But with Leon on Earth, no detached Sorcerer Supreme this time, Odin had chosen different methods. "Don't worry, Queen Frigga." Leon met her nearly desperate eyes. "Thor and Loki should have grown from Odin's harsh lessons. I'll act now." He rose, his magical garment flowing over him until it tightened into the familiar war suit, the Dormammu armor, smooth and living as liquid metal. "It's a shame," he murmured. Thor was about to unleash something bigger, but Laufey cut him off. "It's all right. If Thor matures, Odin will be satisfied," Frigga said, shaking her head. Leon paused at that. Thor maturing. What that would mean was hard to judge. In the other timeline, Thor had survived and later joined the Guardians of the Galaxy, still impulsive, still not exactly mature. Leon pushed the thought away. "I'll go check the situation," he said. "Wait here." He launched himself from the hall. "I'm coming too," Tony called, his armor assembling around him as he tried to follow. In a heartbeat, Leon put up a field and sent him skidding back. The others exchanged looks and stayed in the hall to wait. Chapter 294, Defeated in One Blow. Leon finally made his appearance. Inside the frozen sea, Odin, eyes closed, released a long, relieved sigh. He had already slipped halfway into the Odin sleep. In that state, his divine power could recover, his wounds mend, and his life be prolonged. Though his eyes were shut, he could still sense everything going on outside. If Leon had suddenly broken his word and refused to intervene, Odin would have had to risk his remaining life to deal with Laufey. To be honest, he didn't want to spend what was left of him on that blue-skinned old Ice King. By now, 1/10 of Asgard had been frozen. Laufey led his army across the ice as if he were already walking on his own land. He had never been so elated. His greatest enemy, Odin, had fallen. Odin's son lay frozen nearby, close to death. Laufey could not think of any reason for his own success. He couldn't explain how he'd won, or why Odin had grown so old he could no longer steady his spear, but none of that mattered. All he knew was that he had won. No one could stop him now. "So I am Ragnarok. It is I who bring the so-called Ragnarok," Laufey cried. Standing on an ice peak he had created, he held the casket of ancient winters in one hand and forged an ice sword with the other, pointing it straight at the heavenly palace of Asgard. "I am invincible. I am eternity. From today on, I am the new master of the 9 realms, and the frost giants will rule the 9 realms once more." Below the peak, tens of thousands of crimson eyes watched Laufey. The cold hearts of the frost giants beat faster with excitement. Leon floated in the sky, looking down at the triumphant king. He almost quipped, "Who dares call themselves invincible? Who dares claim to be undefeated? Odin hasn't even gotten that old." The words died on his tongue. He wasn't quite feeling dramatic enough to throw them out. "The night's beautiful," he said instead, voice dropping over the ice. "Even the sea looks nice. Laufey, your casket of ancient winters is being put to good use." His voice fell across the ice like a bell. Ice crystals sprinkled with starlight trembled, and the snowfall quickened. On the ice peak, Laufey looked up through the veil of ice rain and found Leon's silhouette in the night sky. The figure descended with meteor-like speed, but without disturbance, as if the whole man flowed through space like a fish in water. "Who are you?" Laufey demanded, instantly judging his opponent to be powerful. He was not afraid. Holding the casket, he felt indomitable, except against a prime Odin. "I am the Sorcerer Supreme of Midgard, Laufey," Leon replied evenly. "As Odin said, leave. The position of Master of the 9 Realms does not belong to Jotunheim." Leon landed less than 100 meters from Laufey. The king's victorious expression darkened. "You want to stop me? Are you one of Odin's lackeys?" "Something like that," Leon said. "By the way, that casket of ancient winters in your hand was given to me by Odin. When you leave it behind." Laufey barked a furious laugh. "The casket belongs to Jotunheim. That bandit Odin has no right to command it. You're from Midgard? Great, Midgard will fall after Asgard." Midgard was the most backward domain in Laufey's mind. He considered it inferior, even to Jotunheim. With no desire to parley, he activated the casket of ancient winters and unleashed another beam of freezing energy, the very attack that had felled Odin. Using it against a mere Midgard sorcerer felt almost like overkill to him. The ice-blue beam ripped through the air, freezing everything it touched, and racing straight for Leon. "Not bad," Leon observed coolly. "The ray's temperature is near absolute zero." Laufey's trump card looked imposing, but to Leon it seemed slowed, like a frozen frame. "It is indeed a powerful divine artifact," Leon added, thinking that after this he should send a clone to study the casket and perhaps grasp some ice law. "All right, then let's finish this." He didn't dodge. He couldn't afford to. Behind him was the heavenly palace of Asgard, but he didn't need to. Leon's normally placid black eyes flared crimson, burning like twin suns. 2 scarlet beams erupted and drove straight into the oncoming ice-blue ray. There was no dramatic explosion, no cataclysmic impact like the one when Odin had counterattacked. Leon's heat simply met the casket's energy and pushed through. The combined beam pressed back toward Laufey. Holding the casket, Laufey was already a Skyfather-level powerhouse, a force capable of planetary destruction. But differences among Skyfathers were vast. As with celestial bodies, some were millions of times greater than others. The gap between Laufey and Leon was enormous. "This can't be. What is this? How could my casket?" Laufey's triumphant grin vanished as the 2 heat rays instantly fractured his energy. He didn't even have time to move from shock to disbelief before Leon's rays engulfed him and reduced him to ashes. With a muffled pop, the casket of ancient winters fell. Leon was already where Laufey had stood, catching it cleanly. "Very good," Leon murmured, a satisfied smile touching his lips as he felt the casket's daunting power. He turned his head, his eyes were still crimson as he scanned the crowd. "The rest of you frost giants can go home. Heimdall might be willing to give you a ride." Under that terrifying gaze, the surrounding frost giants all took a collective step back. It took them several seconds to process what they had seen. "King," someone cried. "King Laufey," another shouted. "The king's dead, killed by a Midgardian." From launching the counterattack to Laufey's death, it had taken Leon less than a second. The frost giants had blinked, and their king was gone. Shock and fear rippled through them. Even Loki, slumped outside the heavenly palace, was speechless. Thor, his life ebbing away in the ice, stared numbly. The earthlings who had gathered on the palace terrace to watch the battle only now began to fully react. Wanda hugged her arms around herself, cheeks slightly puffed, and whispered to Pietro, "Leon's eyes are a little scary when they turn red. He's much calmer when he's quiet, but there's something about it. I remember that first time we saw them. Scary, yes, but it made me feel safe and somehow thrilled." Chapter 295, Odin's Play. Laufey's death did little to deter the frost giants. Maybe he had died too carelessly, or perhaps their recent victory had made them unwilling to abandon their ambition to rule the Nine Realms. None of the frost giants around Leon intended to leave. They glared at him with red eyes full of hatred. "Midgardian, you killed our king. You must pay," a tall frost giant roared, and the others answered with a chorus of fury. Anger spread like a contagion. More and more frost giants focused their hatred on Leon, ready for battle, only waiting for the first to make a move so they could swarm him. Leon toyed with the casket of ancient winters in his hand and said without looking up, "You'd better think twice. If you want Jotunheim to remain intact for the next few decades, don't make a move." His warning made some hesitate. In the end, a warrior surged forward, shouting about revenge, and slashed at Leon. His charge set off the tide. Tens of thousands of frost giants rushed at Leon as one. In a normal war, a force like that could cut anyone to pieces, but they were facing a Skyfather-level powerhouse. Leon raised his right hand, his 5 fingers slowly closing. Violent spatial fluctuations rippled through the charging mass. The next instant, tens of thousands of tiny black holes opened and vanished, a sudden, brutal shredding of flesh and bone by gravity. The space stabilized again, as if smoothed by silk. The frost giants who had charged were simply gone. This was a straightforward use of spatial power. On film, it recalled Thanos using the Space Stone to attack Doctor Strange, though such feats can be blocked by the right defenses. The frost giants had none. The packed ice plain emptied instantly. Only a few frost giants remained, those who had held back earlier. Leon had spared them. A cold wind swept the ice. Even these natives of an icy realm felt a chill crawl through them to the bone, a fear that started in the heart. Monster, the one who killed King Laufey, is a monster. They were frozen with terror. When Leon pointed to the distant Bifrost terminal and told them to wait there for Odin's arrangements, they scrambled away, crawling and clawing their way toward it. It's over. Jotunheim is finished. That thought filled every surviving giant. Leon allowed himself a small smile. Odin will be ecstatic. I've even handled the hidden dangers for him. He raised an eyebrow and slipped the casket of ancient winters into his world. He did not know exactly how Odin would deal with the 2 princes later, but there would be arrangements to quell rebellion in the 9 realms. After all, many Asgardians had died in this war. Laufey's death was real, and so were the losses. The 9 realms, unwilling to be ruled by Asgard, might have fallen into chaos. But tens of thousands of frost giants gone in an instant, that would give any would-be troublemakers pause. Perhaps, Leon mused idly, they'd try to contact Kamartaj or invite him to found a magic academy. It would be a good time to recruit students from across the 9 realms. Lost in thought about the academy, Leon slowly rose. His eyes flared red and heat vision ignited again. This time, directed at the frozen sea and the Asgardian warriors trapped in the ice. A fan of heat spread out, engulfing much of the ocean. Leon controlled the temperature precisely. The frozen sea began to thaw, steaming as layers of ice melted. First, the upper layer turned into warm currents, then the lower ice gave way. In under 2 minutes, Asgard's sea churned with open water. Leon's black light clone stepped out of his world and became thousands of tentacles, sweeping through the water and scooping up the Asgardian warriors. It didn't forget to harvest valuable genetic material. When its tendrils wrapped around Odin and Thor, it siphoned a mouthful of blood from each. Odin, who had just thawed, noticed Levi's small action. He frowned faintly, but made no move to stop it. His pallor and weakness were part of an act. If he had not been pretending, if Laufey had held the casket of ancient winters against him for real, Odin could have killed him easily. At worst, the strain would have sent him to Valhalla a bit earlier than planned. The surviving Asgardians carried their king to the shore and laid him in the sunlight. Everyone gathered around, sorrowful and attentive. Leon stood to one side, arms crossed, observing. He thought of Asgardian funerals, how similar they were to Viking ship burials on Midgard, the dead placed on a fine wooden boat with weapons and ornaments as grave goods, set adrift and set aflame. If Odin had actually died, they could have sent him off on the spot, one efficient final ceremony. But Odin was not dead. When Frigga reached the shore with Loki, the old king's eyes opened weakly. He looked as if opening his eyelids required every ounce of strength. "Father, you're awake. Thank the gods. Odin." Thor sobbed, tears and snot running down his face with relief. "Father," Loki crouched beside him, his expression tangled with questions, though this was no time to press them. Odin's weak gaze settled on his two sons. "Children, children," he croaked, stretching out his hands with effort. Thor moved to one side. He and Loki each took a hand. "How do you feel, father? We'll take you back to the hall for treatment at once," Thor said, voice trembling with a mixture of relief and concern. Chapter 296, Thor becomes acting all-father. Loki is banished. "No, there's no need, Thor. I know my condition." Odin's voice was weak but steady. "I am about to enter the Odin's Leap. I have always taught you to have the patience of a king. Do you understand?" "I understand, father. I understand everything now. It was always my fault. If it weren't for me, Laufey wouldn't have invaded Asgard." Thor confessed, tears streaming down his face. Loki stood beside him, head bowed, his eyes equally dim. Odin gave a faint, satisfied smile. "Thor, after I fall into slumber, Asgard will be entrusted to you." He paused and added gravely, "Remember, recklessness is not the act of a king. You must think for every citizen of Asgard and for the lives of the 9 realms." "Father," Thor began to promise, but Odin raised a hand to silence him. "Now, in the name of my ancestors, the previous All-Fathers, and myself, Odin, the All-Father, I hereby order Thor Odinson to temporarily manage all affairs of Asgard and the 9 realms. From this moment, Asgard and Kamartaj are to be our closest allies. Everything Asgard possesses shall be shared with our allies." Odin looked across the hall at Lion and nodded once. That settled. He could sleep. "Father?" Loki sprang to his feet, voice sharp and desperate. "What about me? You're making Thor acting all-father. What do you intend for me?" Odin's ancient eyes fixed on Loki. He gripped his son's hand tightly and spoke with sudden, hard clarity. "Loki, you lured the frost giants to Asgard and caused this disaster. You have failed Asgard. Countless innocent lives in the 9 realms may yet be lost because of you." "My son," Odin continued, his tone unyielding, "your sins are grave. I command you to go to Midgard and repent as a mortal." "What? A mortal?" Loki's eyes widened in disbelief. Odin's grip tightened painfully. Strength leapt through his failing body with an almost feral intensity. "Loki, from this moment I strip, seal your magic." A green light surged and wrapped around Loki, then faded. His powers drained away. He stumbled, suddenly human and helpless. Odin released him. Loki slid to the floor, stunned and blank-eyed. "Father!" Thor cried, circling to help him up, ready to argue and protest. Odin lifted one trembling hand and pointed. "Stand there." Thor froze. "Thor, you will send Loki to Midgard and monitor him. Urge him to change." "Aye, yes, father." Thor bowed his head. Odin nodded, satisfied. Loki, collapsed on the cold floor, began to laugh, a raw, hysterical sound. "Father, when the frost giants froze me, I actually took on their form." He looked up, eyes red. "Are you saying I'm under some curse?" Odin was silent for a moment before answering. "Of course not." "Then who am I?" Loki pressed. "You are the Prince of Asgard, the son of Odin." His father said, reading the question behind the words. Loki's face twisted. Heh, is that so? I come from Jotunheim. I brought the casket of ancient winters with me, didn't I? Odin admitted, weakly but plainly. Loki, I found Laufey's child there. He looked small and helpless. I thought he might be the key to peace between Asgard and Jotunheim, so I brought him back. So that's how it was. Loki's composure broke. He rose unsteadily, tears spilling down his face. You used me. I'm just another weapon in your vault. You never loved me, did you? Did you not? Loki suddenly roared. No, Frigga and I, both of you, pretend to love me, but you favor Thor. The throne is his, the praise is his, the recognition is his. I'm a monster from a bedtime story. You will never let me sit the throne. No, Loki. Odin tried to protest, voice failing. He shoved Loki away with a feeble motion, then clutched his chest. His eyes widened and then dulled. Odin had fallen into the Odin's leap. Loki's face froze. All the frantic anger drained out of him. Father! Father! Thor shouted, rushing to his side, but Odin's breath was even. His eyes were closed. Thor wanted to lash out at Loki, but seeing his brother's hollow stare, whatever blame he felt faded. He swallowed it and reached out. Loki, even if everything Father said is true, you are still my brother. He patted his shoulder, then with help picked Odin up and carried him toward the palace. Queen Frigga gathered Loki, holding him as a mother holds a child, soft words, assurances that love remained. Orders were barked, and warriors set to work. Outside, the allied mages and heroes moved like a well-oiled machine. The people of Kamartaj, who had watched the royal drama, sprang into action. Wong and Banner used spells to clear the field and heal the wounded, but no effort matched Lion's and Wanda's. Lion drew upon the reality stone he had acquired from Cassandra. With a single sweep of his hand, the collapsed buildings stitched themselves back into place. Wanda, channeling chaos magic across the sea, rebuilt the shattered Bifrost. Though many soldiers had perished, Asgard's cityscape stood again as if the battle had never been. The warriors Three and Sif, fortunate in their resilience, had survived the freezing of their ship and its crash. Hours later, Thor, resplendent in his armor, stood with his warriors to bid farewell to Lion and the others. Lion had already received the eternal flame and the Eye of Agamotto, as Odin had promised. Following Odin's declaration that Asgard's possessions be shared with allies, Thor also turned over copies of Asgardian magical tomes and a quantity of Uru metal, rare, star-forged ore from which Mjolnir itself had been made, to Kamartaj. At the great portal, Tony waved. We're leaving, Thor. Do a good job being All-Father. If you can't handle the unrest in the Nine Realms, call us. I'll show up. Thor swung Mjolnir and grinned. Ha, I'll beat you the next time we meet, Iron Man. He then turned to Lion. Sorcerer Supreme, I entrust Loki to your care. Don't worry, he'll be in good hands at Kamartaj, Lion replied. Loki had been slated to wander Midgard, but Wong, knowing the academy lacked instructors, had quietly extended an invitation to bring Loki to Kamartaj as a teacher. Lion agreed. After seeing some of Loki's capabilities, he judged the academy safe, and he suspected all of this had been part of Odin's plan. That old, crafty king. With farewells said, the group stepped through the portal. It's finally over. This has been one dramatic Christmas, someone murmured. The portal closed behind them. Tony was promptly swept up by a frantic Pepper, who had spent the day worrying. What do you mean exciting? Are you hurt? Come home so I can check you. She hugged him, photon energy flaring as they vanished into the sky. Everyone shared a laugh, then drifted back to their lives. Banner left with Betty. Old Wong returned to Sarah. Lion went home with Natasha and Shirley. Thor, carrying the weight of a kingdom and his sleeping father, turned toward the palace and the responsibilities of a newly acting All-Father. Chapter 297. It's 2009. The scheduled battle with Asgard hadn't changed their lives. Once they returned to the routine, Old Wang went back to drafting his academy plan. Mordo kept the day-to-day affairs of the sanctum running. Banner busied himself expanding his magical animal farming enterprise. Old Wang gave Banner a specific task: cultivate enough giant magical creatures so that when the Supreme Mage Academy opened, every apprentice would be assigned a magical animal companion, one per student. Only that way, Old Wang argued, could Kamartaj show its deep heritage as a mage holy land handed down through the ages. Banner adjusted his glasses and thought to himself that before he'd arrived, Kamartaj hadn't had magical animals. So how could that be called a heritage? Loki, meanwhile, had been unsettled since his arrival on Earth. Mordo had assigned him to spend time with Banner and the animals to relax, but Banner still had to let the Hulk out sometimes to blow off steam. Each time the Hulk appeared, Loki, now mortal, shuddered and tried to flee. The poor prince lived under a shadow, constantly tense, wondering whether Banner would transform that day. To escape the anxiety, Loki's mischief came out. One evening at dinner, Loki deliberately goaded Banner into getting rid of the Hulk. Banner hesitated, then transformed. Hulk roared, overturned the table, grabbed Loki, and swung him wildly. As a mortal, Loki couldn't withstand that. If Banner hadn't reacted instantly, using his practice star projection to eject the Hulk, then dropping to his knees, cradling Loki and casting desperate healing spells while begging him not to die, Loki might never have seen the sun of Kamartaj the next morning. After that, whenever Loki saw Banner, he would press his face to Banner's chest for a heartbeat and then scurry away. Watching Loki unravel like that worried Mordo. Loki had been banished and adopted, but he was still an Asgardian prince, and Thor had said he would come to Earth to see his brother. Mordo, feeling unsure how to handle it, reported the situation to Leon and let the Sorcerer Supreme decide. When Mordo came forward, Leon was in the middle of listening to Yelena's pitch. The poor kid was trying to get him to greenlight a sequel to Superman and Iron Man. She already had a title, Superman and Iron Man, Rescuing Asgard. The script was mostly her work with minor rewrites from Tony, except Iron Man, a supposed supporting character, had more screen time than the lead. Leon was about to send it back for revisions when Mordo's report reached him. He waved his hand and told Yelena to film Thor 1 instead. The plan was to copy the plot from the earlier Worlds film and give Loki a starring role, partly to help the prince indulge his dream of becoming a god king. Half a month later, Leon had stopped paying much attention to the superhero company. Yelena complained at home that Loki was being a diva, rewriting scenes and steering the film away from Thor toward the legend of Loki, the God King. Leon just said that since Loki was a loser in real life, let him have his fantasy. After an exciting Christmas and a peaceful New Year, February 2009 arrived. Tony looked haggard at times. Pepper seemed radiant. Wanda had signed with the superhero company and become a street-level hero in New York. In early evenings, she'd shut down almost all of Kingpin's illegal operations in Hell's Kitchen. If Natasha hadn't stopped her, reminding her that New York's criminal underworld needed a certain balance maintained, Wanda might well have uprooted Kingpin's power entirely. Pietro's reputation on the streets didn't shine as brightly as Wanda's, and he would occasionally bang his head and lament that he should have taken on Kingpin too. He could have been famous and rich from endorsements. Leon, during this period, wasn't constantly immersed in cultivation. By day, he sometimes went shopping with Wanda and Spider-Gwen from the adjacent Spider-Verse. At night, he helped Natasha and Yelena with physical training. He even traveled to the biochemical universe to train with Jill and Ada Wong. 5 years had passed in that universe since the end of its world, and order had been reestablished. Every time Leon went there, he jumped back in its timeline to the last moment he'd left, so for Jill and Ada, Leon had effectively never left. On this day, Leon unusually sat cross-legged on the rooftop of his Brooklyn home. New York's early February streets were still white with snow. He faced the sun, flakes slid harmlessly off his body and drifted to the pavement below. I've fully reached the limit of the World Master realm, he reflected. Next, I need to fully comprehend a law to break through to immortality. He reviewed his progress inwardly. I can't grow stronger by ordinary cultivation anymore. I can still increase my physical strength by bathing in the sun, but I need to advance in other areas too. The law of light is nearly half grasped. Time and space are about 1/3 understood. With the help of the Casket of Ancient Winters and the Eternal Flame, I've initiated ice and fire, and I've also started on the law of soul. It'll take at least another half year to break through to immortality. While I'm in the World Master stage, I can place the Infinity Stones inside my inner world and study them directly. That's almost zero-distance contact with the origins of the universe. The cultivation speed is like a miracle. Once I reach immortality, I won't have that condition. So it's best to stay at World Master a while longer. I should be able to fully grasp time and space in roughly 2 years. Then I can step across immortality and break into Law Venerable, maybe even Law Master. Related secondary settings are in Chapter 166. He thought of another matter. He had 3 clone slots. The third was still empty. My main body is human. The first, the Blood Sea clone, is an energy reserve. The second, the Black Light clone, is a genetic analyzer. Both are useful. The third should be something that strengthens my main self. Superman's most absurd trait is his idealistic power. You can't analyze idealism easily, but if I could have a clone with idealistic power, it might help me tap into that. And it would be best if this clone could help me comprehend laws, ideally possessing characteristics close to the universe itself. The main body has Kryptonian blood. The Blood Sea clone can become a giant or an ocean. The Black Light virus is a virus. The third one should be an energy type. He considered the worlds. Is there any creature among all the worlds that is an energy life form, idealistic by nature and close to the universe? I'll try the omnipotent cross-world travel ability. Start world search. Keywords: energy life, idealistic, close to the universe, third clone, low threat. Starting retrieval. World anchoring successful. Energy required. Travel confirmed. Chapter 298. Duo. That familiar tug returned. The sensation Leon always felt when a portion of his energy was drawn away. He left the Marvel universe, slipped through another thin world membrane, and arrived in the target universe. There actually are beings who meet such strict conditions, he thought. A weightless, floating feeling told him he was now inside that universe. He stretched, opened his eyes, and saw the familiar azure planet below. He was in space. He activated his super hearing and sifted through the incoming noise: chaos, despair, shouts, and cheers. This world teetered on the brink of apocalypse, yet many still clung to hope, shouting encouragement, urging each other to hold on. Through the din, Leon found the phrases he needed. "Come on, Ultraman, the future of humanity rests on you." "Come on, Ultraman?" Leon blinked. An Ultraman world? Was this the climax of one of the live-action films? He listened harder, then frowned. On this Earth, someone was muttering in a conflicted voice. "Musashi, enough. You've done enough. Ultraman, why do you fight so desperately to protect Earth?" Behind him, electromagnetic waves in space converted into sound in his ears. Grunts, cries, the noises of a fierce struggle. 2 voices were straining with all their strength against something. Leon turned in space and looked back. Far behind the planet, a disc-shaped machine, over 1,000 meters across, floated in the void. It spewed a deadly beam toward Earth. Leon, who could gauge temperature with his heat vision, estimated the beam at around 10 million degrees Celsius. If it hit, it would trigger a mass extinction on the surface. 2 figures 40 to 50 meters tall stood between the beam and Earth. One was red and blue, the other red and black. Leon's breath hitched. "Giga Endra and Cosmos and Justice Ultraman?" he murmured. Distant memories surfaced. He was watching the final battle. Deletian, the enforcer and prophet of the multiverse who deemed humanity an unstable threat, had sent forces to destroy mankind. Cosmos and Justice had intercepted them, but even together they couldn't stop Deletian's ultimate reset machine, Giga Endra. The mass-produced device had nearly pushed Earth to doom. In the last desperate moment, Cosmos and Justice fused under the reset light, calling forth the will of the great universe, Duo. Leon took it all in. This was the story's climactic scene. The 2 Ultramen fought the resetting light, but despite their teamwork, they were being driven back. He drifted a little to the side. No need to interfere yet. The third clone his traversing ability could unlock should be an Ultraman, and he had deliberately keyed the affinity for this universe. Maybe, he thought, he could ask Duo to allow himself to be cloned. Cosmos and Justice were weakening rapidly. Their resistance frayed, and under the cries from Earth, they were swallowed by the reset beam. A violent explosion rippled through space, despair spread. Then, from within the blast, a brilliant, sacred light rose, majestic and vast. Leon watched the image he'd seen before overlap with the present moment. He felt like the boy who'd exclaimed in front of a screen, "When 2 cosmic wills converge, a magnificent form appears in the dazzling light." The entrance music in his memory beat a rhythm in his head. As the radiance faded, Duo manifested, divine and commanding. He was a living embodiment of the deep cosmos, silver, blue, and black, as if condensed from the universe itself. Born of the great universe's will, an omnipotent god with eternal, infinite power, Leon's mind raced. Could a being like this really become his clone? He imagined how to ask. Would he beg for a single ray of light, or, like the new generation Ultramen, call out and be gifted power outright? He hesitated, then realized he'd been muttering aloud. Sound didn't travel in space, but his traversing ability created a bridge to the cosmic consciousness of the target universe. Perhaps his words had been conveyed that way. Legiduo turned his deep gaze toward Leon. The giant nodded. Leon's heart stuttered. The nod answered his muttered plea. He took it to mean Legiduo consented to give him a ray of light. Tentatively, he asked, Legiduo Ultraman, may I have a ray of your light? There's a grave crisis in my world, and I must nurture a clone of you. Legiduo nodded again, this time pointing toward Giga Endra. Leon followed the gesture. The ring-shaped machine was recharging. The reset beam would fire again. The meaning was clear. Legiduo's offer came with a condition: deal with Giga Endra. It made sense. Legiduo had stood aloof until now. He didn't simply hand out his power. He expected equality. No debts, no one-sided favors. The Giants of Light were fair and righteous. Leon bowed to Legiduo in an Ultraman nod of thanks, then clenched his fists and shot toward Giga Endra. Chapter 299. The appearance of Zhang Dracian, Giga Endra, was Deletian's ultimate weapon. To Deletian, it was just one mass-producible tool among many, but even placed in an Ultraman special effects epic, it would stand as a final boss. Humanity's light cannons that could pulverize asteroids left not so much as a scratch. Even combined beams from Cosmos and Justice bounced off it. Its reset beam could easily defeat 2 Ultramen. For the moment, that beam had been throttled down. Its purpose then was merely to purge humanity and reshape Earth's environment. Now, facing the suddenly appearing Legiduo, Giga Endra unleashed the reset beam at full power. Legiduo relaxed his arms and let Leon take over. Leon unleashed his heat vision. The crimson beam sprang forth and slammed into the reset beam head-on. Under normal conditions, Leon's heat vision registered roughly the temperature of the sun's surface, about 6,000 degrees Celsius. Against the reset beam's tens of millions of degrees, it felt like a freezing ray. At first, the heat vision was pushed back, and Leon expected it. He was testing. Giga Endra's reset beam was clearly stronger than Dormammu's energy attack when he left the dark dimension. It could easily destroy a planet. It redefined the upper limit of energy attacks Leon had encountered. But Leon never looked intimidated. He grew excited. He poured more power into the heat vision, temperature and impact climbing rapidly. 10,000 degrees, 100,000, a million, 10 million. He pushed heat vision to the limit his head could withstand. The crimson beam began to shift, taking on a white-gold brilliance. Leon poured out his energy freely. Even the cold of space seemed to warm. From Earth, the 2 titanic flares could be seen, their brightness outranking sunlight. Bit by bit, the reset beam gave ground and accelerated backward. At last, with a silent burst of light, Giga Endra's beam dissipated. Leon's heat vision expanded and wrapped the 1,600-meter-long machine. To be immersed in tens of millions of degrees or more was like being plunged into a star's core. The thermal impact hurled Giga Endra far away. Leon gradually dialed the ray down and cut it off. Using his supervision, he studied the distant machine and felt a prick of surprise. Even after enduring that assault, Giga Endra had not been catastrophically damaged. Only parts of its outer casing were scorched black. Around that shell, a layer of damaged, invisible energy shielding glowed faintly and was already repairing itself. Its resistance to energy attacks is remarkable, Leon muttered. Is it tougher than Dormammu? He let his wrist twist. His strongest attack was a physical one. Giga Endra's combat pattern was simple. Once its energy shield finished repairing it, it began to charge again and fired the reset beam a second time. Leon made no motion to block. He simply flew straight at Giga Endra and dove into the reset beam. The beam pushed back, but Leon's body surged with world power, a fusion of genetic primal energy and psychic force. The vast inner world projected outward. The starry sky world's power amplification technique detonated within him. Every cell roared with energy, blood coursed like a river through his veins. This was Leon's strongest full-power strike. With the force of a compressed world, Leon shattered the reset beam with a single blow. His punch tore through Giga Endra's outer defenses as if they were nothing more than a soap bubble. The bubble burst. The machine ruptured. Leon drove his fist through again and again, ripping Giga Endra open. He finished the wreckage with heat vision until, after only a few breaths, the planet-destroying engine that had brought despair to Earth and the Ultramen was little more than molten scrap. Silence fell for a heartbeat, then cheers of relief rose from Earth. Leon hovered, then flew back to Leyedo. The two exchanged the brief Ultraman nod. Leyedo swiped the Aurora timer on his chest, and a vast sphere of light appeared in his palm. Leon felt a surge of excitement and restraint. Leyedo Ultraman, I can only create clones weaker than myself, he said. I'll need your help to weaken the light a little. Leyedo said nothing. He coolly opened his hand and let the light drift into Leon's inner world. Leon felt it briefly. The aura of that light was not so different from his own, but it had clearly been reduced many times over by Leyedo. So Leyedo had known and handled it already. Leon gave a big thumbs up. Words failed him. Awesome was the closest. Leyedo, the omnipotent godlike figure of the Ultraman who embodied universal justice and order, had offered selfless help. Leon hadn't felt that kind of aid from anyone besides Tony and Pepper in a long time. The biohazard world's world consciousness, Odin, everyone's help had been transactional in some way. Even the Ancient One had always come with strings. Perhaps only an entity like Leyedo, powerful and lawful enough to treat everyone equally, could offer assistance without expecting anything in return. Once I create a clone, I will use it to uphold justice and order in my universe, Leon promised. He could offer no payment, only his word not to abuse the power. Leyedo gave the Ultraman nod again, silent but acknowledging. Then a voice, majestic and somehow benevolent, cut across the cosmos and reached Leon and the people on Earth alike. Legendary warrior Leyedo, visitor from another universe, why are you willing to protect these Earthlings? Leon turned. In the vastness of space, countless Gloaka motherships had appeared, Delesian's weapons, each comparable in scale to Ultraman Cosmos. Behind those ships, a phantom light swirled and rotated, filling a large portion of Leon's vision. It was unmistakable. Delesian. Chapter 11. Problems in the Making, A New Journey. Leon was a little surprised. Delesian had actually asked him a question. He thought for a moment and replied, I'm an Earthling too, though from a different Earth. The main reason, of course, was the mission Leyedo had given him. But Leon added that an Earthling naturally must protect Earth. After he finished speaking, a brilliant light suddenly surged from Leyedo, enveloping the god of the universe. Leyedo split into two, reverting back into cosmos and justice. The two were the dual aspects of Leyedo, one representing order, the other justice. Faced with Delesian's inquiry, Leyedo clearly didn't want to answer directly, so the two Ultraman stepped forward themselves. It was much simpler from there. Both Justice and Cosmos firmly declared they were willing to put their faith in humanity. Delesian left with a remark that he too would believe in the Light Warriors and in humanity's persistence and hope, then departed the solar system with his fleet. Leon wasn't surprised. Humanity's bellicose nature had brought Delesian to Earth, and the hope they still clung to in despair had made him choose to leave. Of course, the immediate reason was Leyedo's appearance, which itself was the result of Cosmos and Justice simultaneously sustaining fatal injuries when they were together. Leon stroked his chin, remembering what netizens had said in his previous life. Ever since they learned they could summon Leyedo, these two Ultraman had been willing to take blows on themselves. When he returned to the Ultraman universe in the future, he might very well see Leyedo again. For now, he was eager to go back and nurture his clone. Farewell, both of you, he said, nodding to Cosmos and Justice. Eh? Cosmos, who had been looking back toward Earth, immediately panicked. You're leaving already? Did we not treat you properly? How should I address you? That was clearly Musashi, who was one with Cosmos. Leon smiled and waved. The Earth that needed protection has been saved. We'll introduce ourselves next time. Goodbye, Cosmos and Justice. With that, he activated his travel ability and returned to the Marvel Universe. Only Cosmos remained, filled with regret. What a pity. I wanted to invite him to Earth and introduce him to everyone. There's actually an Earthling who could beat Giga Endra barehanded." Leon returned to the rooftop at the same moment he'd left. He sat cross-legged and began nurturing his clone. Inside his world, the process was the same as when he had nurtured the Black Light clone. Leon activated his cloning ability. The world's power enveloped Legiduo's light and began to analyze his biological data. Because Legiduo was unimaginably powerful, his data were far more complex than usual. This process should have taken a very long time, possibly centuries. But Legiduo had already decrypted all of his biological information. All Leon had to do was read it. In less than a day, within his inner world, the data reading finished. The residual energy of the starry sky world's source will reappeared and began transforming Legiduo's light. After some time, the transformation was complete, and the cloning ability continued to operate. Just as Leon anxiously awaited the time feedback from his inner world, the cloning ability unexpectedly stalled. No, more than stalled. It failed outright and shut down. "Failed," Leon muttered. "What's going on?" He hadn't thought failure impossible, but when it actually happened, disappointment hit him hard. The weight of the loss took him a few minutes to recover from. Legiduo was simply too powerful, and the clone was too important. He'd pinned too much on it. But Leon's will was strong. After calming down, he re-examined the reasons the clone couldn't be nurtured. He checked the state of his inner world, the world's power reserves, and Legiduo's light. "So that's it," he said. "Legiduo's light aura and mine are both at the World Master level, but his genetic level is 10,081 times perfect genes. In the Starry Sky universe, 10,081 was treated as a perfect number. In that system, any truly perfect form had to meet that standard. 10,081 faces, the minimum for the perfect structure. When a life's genetic level reached 10,081, it was considered a perfect life, flawless in genes, flesh, and structure. A perfect life could grow to massive sizes, even tens of thousands of kilometers, and could receive a unique innate secret technique granted by the source will. Perfect lives were extraordinarily rare and special. So the reason Leon couldn't nurture the clone was simple. "My genetic level is too low," he frowned. "I can probably nurture a life up to about 20 times my genetic level. My main body's genetic level is 200, so the most I can nurture is around 4,000. Legiduo is way over that limit." Besides, this was likely because Legiduo had deliberately suppressed his light. Otherwise, with his actual strength, he wouldn't show a genetic level of only 10,081. It's impossible to nurture right now, but not hopeless, Leon thought. In the Starry Sky universe, because of the source will's suppression, only at the Lawmaster level can one modify genes beyond 100-fold. But in Marvel, I don't have that suppression. I can try to modify my main body's genes to raise my life level. However, if he used only the genes the Black Light clone had devoured as reference, it would take an impossibly long time to raise himself to a level sufficient to nurture Legiduo's clone. From his current perspective, to significantly increase the main body's genetic level, he'd need to keep traveling between worlds. To find the most suitable genetic references quickly, there was only one place, the DC universe. Leon's eyes flickered. "It's time to visit DC. To be safe, I'll scout the movie version first." "What? You're going to DC?" Tony pushed his recliner back with a clang and jumped up. "You can't resist going after kryptonite, can you?" "You little brat, if I didn't know better, were you planning to sneak off by yourself and get stabbed to death by Joker or Batman with some kryptonite?" He grabbed Leon's arm, suddenly donned his armor, and stared at him so intently it was almost comical. "If you were really going to do something like that, I'd make Jarvis play your least favorite song at your funeral." Tony was anxious enough to babble. He started to play the sentimental card. "You can't go have fun in another world by yourself and leave your poor big brother behind. Are you even my little brother?" Listening to Tony circle around everything without saying it plainly, Leon felt both helpless and touched by the anxious, stiff-faced man. He pushed Tony away gently. "All right, I'm telling you this because I want you to come with me. Go get ready. Once you're packed, we'll leave." Leon was actually glad he'd checked in with Tony out of caution. Looking at him like this, if he had really gone to DC alone and Tony had found out whether anything happened to him or not, Tony would have been angry a long time.